All right, let's catch up with Derek Piper and talk some Illinois basketball because there's always stuff to talk about in the offseason that never sleeps. Derek, how are you, man?
Good. Chugging along through. It's nice to get out in the high school scene, see some 2024s, 2025s. Was up in Riverside Brookfield 2 weeks ago, and this past weekend up in Romeoville. So it's been a little bit of a throwback where we're talking all portal all spring and didn't have a lot of focus on high school recruiting. So I got to enjoy some of that, get back on the road, and we still have one open spot. So I know we're going to talk about that, but it's been good. How you doing?
Good. I do want to talk about two things that this season, this off season, have been talked over and over about. So I'm kind of tired of talking about them, but I feel they still are topics, and that includes Illinois' point guard situation and Brandon Pajimski. So those two things are in the news yet again this week. But I do want to get into some of this prep recruiting because I do find solace in the long-term planning and development of players that you can keep in your program for a long time. So we will dive into Phoenix Gill and Jason Jaxtis and all of that. But let's start here. Jeremiah Williams. I guess the joke is, what was your favorite moment of the Jeremiah Williams era of Illinois? I have to put that out there. What happened here, Derek, where Jeremiah Williams seemed like the staff was excited about adding him as a point guard after Ray J. Dennis, and then he decommits, and he will not be at Illinois.
There were just question marks with him from the moment he committed, which were just hours after Ray J. Dennis chooses Baylor. You talk around to people around the program, and they were involved with him, obviously, last offseason and liked his ability to be a really good defender, someone that can get to the rim. There is some suspect three-point shooting there. Goes to Iowa State. They just flat out missed on him, and we're a little bit bummed out by that fact because of Brad's relationship with his dad. He played for him when Brad was an assistant there at Western Illinois. So it circles around after the Achilles injury. He doesn't play last year at Iowa State. He goes into the portal, and Illinois has a spot to give. Now, they did fill up by adding him at that point late in May, but the fact of him needing a waiver to be able to be eligible because this was his second transfer, the Achilles recovery, which seems to be at least progressing some because he's back on the court doing some non-contact stuff. It's easing his way back into basketball activities. Still the ramp-up process of getting into 5-on-5 and that whole kind of deal would have to play out probably into the fall and see how that is responding. But then you also had kind of a late developing story with Iowa State and Iowa. There's a gambling situation there that people are getting looked into for gambling involvement that's against the NCAA rules. And the more I heard it from enough people that comfortable saying that Jeremiah at least has some form of involvement or question marks surrounding his involvement with that when he was at Iowa State. So I think that was really kind of the cherry on top for a case for Illinois and him to cut ties. And that's ultimately what happened. And we'll see where he ends up. Of course, with the gambling thing, I've dug into it a little bit. I know that a tight end at Virginia Tech last year got caught up in betting on some NFL. And it opens up a whole conversation on how much should this stuff be penalized and everything. But he was gambling NFL and got suspended half a season of his senior season because of that involvement. I mean, we're not talking about betting on his own team or even college football games for his situation. I don't know what all the details are with Jeremiah, but that type of thing could introduce a possible suspension, even a lengthy one. Then you also have the waiver. You also have the injury. So just a lot there for Jeremiah, and ultimately he will not be on the line.
Yeah, and given Josh Whitman's stance on gambling that he reiterated this past week, that would not be a surprise that he and Illinois would want to steer clear of any kind of connection to that. So, of course, Derek, the Illini fans continue. Any point guard that enters the transfer portal, and they are still entering the transfer portal because they can still be grad transfers. Alabama, former five-star prospect Javon Quinterly enters this week. Joe Toussaint, West Virginia. We know what's happened there. Kirk Kriisa went in the portal. Now he's back at West Virginia. So it seems like that staff did some work there, potentially some booster work too. But they got one spot open. Derek, traditionally, Brett Underwood has liked to leave one spot open, but we know point guard remains a concern at the very worst. Are the Illini done with their point guard pursuits, or do you expect them to continue to look at whoever enters the portal?
I think they're open to still looking. I know everybody wants an answer of they will for sure 100% add a point guard, or those will say we're completely done adding. Let's just rock with this roster. There's some nuance there, some middle ground of the situation matters, the fit matters, and the NIL matters. That's another thing that as you looked at Kirk Ariza's situation, a guy that got a really nice payday to go to West Virginia in the first place, and then once he goes back into the portal, the word was, well, to get him, he wants even more than what he had at West Virginia, which if you want an example, it sounded like he was getting about 600,000 to go to West Virginia NIL wise. And there were some people that thought that Memphis might've given him 800 and that another school out there was going to maybe give him a multi-year, 2-year deal worth like 1 million, 1.2 million. So you're talking big money for these guys that enter late. So there's that incentive for though supply and demand, like Paul Mulcahy going in late, Javon Quinterly going in late. These guys are going to command some legit money, and that's something with Illinois. I don't think that they have endless supply of NIL though left to really go out there and just get whoever they want. I think also the situation with you've now positioned yourself with Ty Rodgers to say, hey, you're going to play a good amount at point guard. We want you on the ball. We like you there. You got him in that situation. You got Drake Gibbs-Lawhorn, someone they've been really impressed with his talent first and foremost, and also just the way that he's working right now. So Sincere has made a nice step forward, according to the staff, is how they're seeing that. So you're trying to figure out the chemistry part of it, the guys you want to get some minutes there, and if you bring somebody else in, what's the domino effect? How's the overlap of roles take place? And there's just all those things to weigh as you look at some of these options, even though Illinois still is kind of a point guard situation away from having really everything you would want, I think, going into a season.
Derek, I'm going to make my case of why we should be done with the point guard pursuits. Okay. One, I'm just burned out. I'm burned out about it. Every point guard there is portal, Illinois got to go get. I don't think that's the case anymore. Listen, if there is a no doubt guy like Ray J. Dennis was, I'm taking him. I'm going after him. I am risking potentially upsetting some other guys on the roster because I do think you're a point guard of that caliber away from competing for a Big Ten championship and making a run in the NCAA tournament. Guys like Joe Toussaint, guys like Quinterly, they could be upgrades, but they're not definitive upgrades. And I know people, you're just building a roster for 1 year. I don't believe in that. I still don't believe that. Like, I still think you have to build something for the long term. And the other part is I just believe in Ty Rodgers, the dude. Like, that is a guy I want playing 20 plus minutes a game. Can he do it at point guard? Can he be a, middle of the pack Big Ten point guard as a sophomore when he turned it over a little bit too much? Like, there's risk. There's absolute risk in there. But I also just believe in the guy. I believe in the player. I believe that, he was the guy who was running the point at Thornton. I think those are some of his best skills, are his distributing skills. He can play booty ball. Of course, he can't shoot, and he needs to shoot better free throws. He needs to finish better around the rim. It was about 59% at the rim last year. But I just think he's the kind of guy that we saw last year. He fought through adversity. He got better as the year went on. I wanted him to play a lot as the year went on. And I think with a full off season, I think he can be a solid player at that position. You need everybody else to shoot better. But Derek, I also think, like, do you want to play Joe Toussaint 10 minutes over Sincere Harris or 10 minutes over Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn when those guys, if you let them have growing pains around a roster that's otherwise really good, that could pay off real well in the long term? Like, I still think you want to give minutes to Ty Rodgers and Sincere Harris and Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn. And if Nico Moretti ends up showing something, I'd rather just kind of side with that than adding Joe Toussaint or somebody of that caliber who just kind of upset everything. Like, these guys are practicing together now. Like, I feel like, hey, take those guys to Europe for 10 practices and in several games, see what you got. Like, it's not the best situation. I get it, but you missed on Ray J. Dennis. You put all the eggs in that basket, and now I just kind of roll with what I got, unless another Ray J. Dennis. Like I just don't know if the Quinterleys or Toussaints of the world are changing much for me.
I think that's very fair. And I think it is complicated because, again, like there's a lot baked into this year having the potential to get that dark cloud away from this program that, hey, you haven't been to a Sweet 16 in forever. And if you do have a very solid to good point guard situation, then I think that really gives this roster everything you'd want to get there. But yeah, what is sacrifice in the process if you were to bring in a Toussaint? And I'm with you. I don't think Toussaint is a huge needle mover. There's a chance that you give Ty Rodgers a full offseason to rep at point guard and give him some games through the first months of the season. And maybe midway through the year or even late in the year, Ty Rodgers is a better point guard option than Toussaint would even be. But I don't think you get Joe Toussaint without making him your starting point guard from the get-go. I think he'd want that assertion. I think he'd want a number of guaranteed minutes. And, yeah, that would cut into what Ty would get on the ball. Not to say he can't play the 3-some, the 4-some, but bringing back, of course you'd want to, bringing back Coleman Hawkins, adding Quincy Guerrier. You've got 3 guys in that front court, and Guerrier, Coleman, and Dane for 2 spots essentially that are all supposed to play pretty big minutes. So there's less opportunity for Ty to play there. And yes, it also affects Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, Sincere Harris. And I do think, well, I've heard, earlier in the offseason, hey, we don't want to be held back from making additions because it is year by year, because that happened last year. It was Sky Clark, Jaden Epps. Can we get Courtney Ramey? Should we? And ultimately they said, no, we don't want to upset those guys. We want them for the long term.
It's a fair
Both
point.
those guys left anyway, and you didn't get Courtney Ramey, and you regretted it there in the fall. But I think they do want to not have –
if Courtney Ramey were available right now, I'd take him. Like that level of guy, I would go get him. That I guess that's my point is I just think Sincere Harris can probably do a lot of the things you want Toussaint to do, and he's
Right.
a longer Mulcahy I get, but I feel like Ty Rodgers can eventually be Mulcahy-like. He needs to shoot better, of course, but like that I would get if you went and got Paul Mulcahy or somebody like that. But some of these other names we brought up, I just wouldn't be on paper. It'll look great, Derek, in case of an injury or all this, but I still do think like we've seen it. Like I think it matters of your chemistry of getting these guys to buy in and showing a little bit of loyalty to him. I know that might have hurt Brad Underwood last year, but I think the decision I think last year was the decision to go all in on Sky Clark, basically. Mm-hmm. That really hurt that position.
Yeah, 100%. And I would definitely take Paul Mulcahy. I would risk not playing Sincere enough or Justin Harmon coming in if he doesn't get the type of minutes he'd want to slot in Mulcahy as your starting point guard and let Ty be your backup option in that kind of a sense. But there would be risk that, hey, now we got to play Ty more at the 3 and Luke Goody doesn't play enough. And so there's some of those tough decisions. But I think Mulcahy's good enough that I would say let's roll with it. I'd really like a point guard rotation. And Mulcahy is my first option, Ty is my second option. And then beyond that, maybe it's Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, maybe it's Sincere. Maybe if Moretti is ready for that, then he could be in that situation. Quinterly, I think, is a good option too. I know he's had some ups and downs as a player. I think he had a really good tournament game this past year, but I think you're going to be priced out. I think you're going to be priced out of Quinterly. I think you're going to be priced out of Mulcahy. You were with Kriisa. So I think that is also a situation of who can you afford? Are they worth it in terms of the overlap of bringing them in and upsetting the apple cart in that type of a sense? But it's hard to have I get both sides of it. I really do.
Yeah.
And it's a risk. It's a risk to go in with what you have. But I do think I like Ty on the ball. I really do. I love Ty as a player. If you're going to have a non-shooter, I think sometimes the best place to have him is on the ball where you've just got shooting around him. And I like Coleman as a 5 with Ty at the 1. And if he can study a lot of Jalen Pickett tape and back some people down and get to the rim, and I do think he's a fantastic passer, that's a situation that I think can work from him. I do wonder about that behind him, the second rotation of point guards. Is Sincere going to have the game slow down enough for him to make decisions on the ball? Is Dre going to be solid enough as a true freshman? Moretti is a redshirt freshman who is probably a liability defensively because he's pretty slender and not the best athlete out there. And maybe now you consider more of let's try to fix Justin Harmon's turnover issues. I mean, that dude played a ton of ball screens last year, and if he's still got to make it to campus, but maybe you can shore up some of the things that really ailed him turnover wise. That's a guy that's played with the ball in his hands a good amount too.
Yeah, I'm not saying Ty Rodgers fix everything. I don't. I mean, it is your weakness going into the season. It's a shame it is a weakness, but we've rehashed the Ray J. Dennis sweepstakes, right?
One more last point. Speaking of rehashing, and you mentioned it earlier, storylines that will never die. Brandon Podziemski's part of this too. Like the people that are and there are a lot of them on Twitter and on our message board. And how did Brad Underwood see this guy every day in practice and recruit over him and not give him an opportunity? There's some of that reference to the current situation at point guard. Like, what if you bring in somebody at point guard, Sincere gets buried, or Ty doesn't play the minutes he wants, and or Dre Gibbs Lawhorn doesn't get what he thinks he should get as a freshman, and one of those guys leave or multiple leave, and one of them blossoms into a fantastic player, and you're kind of in that same situation. It's kind of the opposite Brandon Podziemski effect. If you were to say, I like the guys we got, I don't want to bury one of those guys, I want to play these dudes, and it pays off. Where the people have said, what happened to the development program? What happened to the ride with the guys you brought in recruited wise? And that's some of the knocks that Brad got for that. Then you could say, hey, he's kind of taking a little bit of a different angle with the point guard situation. I just think that is an interesting reference.
Yeah. And I find the dialogue around Brad Underwood just really interesting right now. Like, I get it. Like, he's got to win in the NCAA tournament. And until he does that, until they make a run, there's going to be a portion that's, there's going to be this weird dichotomy of this guy's taken us so far and look how far we've come. But he's not above criticism. The point guard situation is not above criticism. But I do find just this fan base is just so intense right now, and they're so passionate that they just want this extended run that they feel like they should have had the last couple of years, and they just haven't gotten to that point. So that's why there's so much angst around a team that's probably gonna be a top half Big Ten team. Returns two of the best players in the Big Ten. But yeah, adding the 19th overall draft pick, leaving your program as somebody who had under 70 minutes, Derek, and then is drafted 19th. Let's dive into that right now, shall we? You and I mean, we've talked about this before on the podcast, but my takeaway from this, and I tweeted it, and people thought I was trying to take a shot at Underwood or thought I wasn't taking a shot at Underwood, and I should. Listen, that stings when a guy becomes the highest drafted former Illini basketball player, and since what, Darren Williams, or Myers Leonard.
Yep.
That stings, but I also think it was a sign that Brandon Podziemski made a fantastic decision. I think more guys should consider transferring down and finding the role or the school that best fits for you, and going where Jalen Williams shined, and he was a great rookie for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think it was a really smart decision by him. I think he needed the ball in his hands. I don't think he was going to get that at Illinois, and ultimately Illinois chose Sky Clark, which 99 out of 100 of us would have done at this time last year, and it ended up stinging Illinois. I mean, that's the way I look at it, because Sky Clark committed on April 7th. Brandon Podziemski transferred on April 13th.
Yeah, that was the last domino for Brandon to really see that backcourt was so crowded and nothing was really guaranteed. And he wanted to be told after barely playing as a freshman, hey, there's a pretty clear path for you to step into a much larger role. Illinois was not willing to at least assure him that was a guarantee. So they brought in Sky, they brought in Jaden Sincere, and I think also you got to also consider, Terrence Shannon Jr. is part of that mix as well. And then who, even in hindsight, what Brandon Podziemski did, albeit 44% from three, and the numbers he put up at Santa Clara were ridiculous. It is a different level. Not to completely discount the WCC, because you got some good teams in there, Gonzaga, St. Mary's, but would he have had that same type of year in the Big Ten? I don't think anybody out there is necessarily saying that. Well, there are some people that probably would go that far, but I would disagree with them.
He has a skill set they certainly needed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you saw, hindsight's easy. RJ Melendez having the year that he had. If you slotted in Brandon and how many open corner threes that RJ took and didn't make, if you give Brandon Podziemski those looks, he probably has a really nice year and provides such a great shooting role for a team that just didn't shoot it that well. And I do wonder. I think Brandon on the ball stuff is like what he wanted. I don't see him as a true point guard, although he admittedly, and seeing some of the NBA combine stuff, some of his assist numbers, decision making, and pick and rolls was more advanced than I thought it would be for a guy as a sophomore. But yeah, it's just a tough one, and it's such a unique deal. Like I will reiterate, I've said it before. The first time Illinois ever saw him play in person was when he showed up to campus in June as an incoming freshman. They never went out and saw him because they couldn't. It was COVID. Nobody could recruit off campus. Everybody's evaluating on film and videos and highlight tapes to get posted on Twitter, and that's how he gets offers from Illinois, Kansas, Kentucky. Kansas and Kentucky aren't pushing at the end, so that part of it is there. The competition in high school was a question, and he didn't play all that well in practices and stuff in the summer. It was like, hey, this guy's got a big learning curve. So I understand it's not a great look. It's frustrating because of the need that he could have filled last year, but he did, like you said it perfectly. I mean, he did the best thing for him. He found the role, the opportunity. He did it right for himself, and we'll see where he goes from here.
Listen, it sucks if you're an Illinois fan. It does. It absolutely does. But the conversation of he needed to play more as a freshman, we can go back and say, yeah, you should have played him over Curbelo. Who was doing that for a guy people were considering a preseason All-American, Derek? A guy that was the Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year as a freshman. Like, you weren't doing that at that point. Like Alfonso Plummer, Trent Frazier, DeMonte Williams, you won a Big Ten championship with that team. And listen, he gave a spark in the Northwestern game, but that's about it, right? It's not like when he came in there, it was like, oh, this guy's another level. And listen, I think he's going to the perfect spot for his skill set. Going to Golden State, basically going to play that Jordan Poole role with Steph and Clay and all those guys. Like, that's a perfect fit. If anybody else would have taken him 19, I think that would have been a bold call, because there's not a lot of guys who transfer down, become first-round picks, and have succeeded. I think Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo went over that, but phenomenal decision by Brandon Podziemski, and I'm happy for the kid. What a rise. It's really rare. Anything else to add on that hot topic besides it stinks for Illinois, but it seems like a lot of hindsight we're talking about? Like, listen, if Brad Underwood saw it in practice, or if it was that clear in practice, I think Brad Underwood would have rolled with him.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And it's a guy that works his butt off. I mean, he's obviously put himself in a situation through his work to be able to have the type of year that he had. And yeah, it helped that he went into a situation that wanted to give him a primary scoring option role. And he would not have had that at Illinois. He wouldn't have had that at a lot of high majors. I think it's a fair point that some have made that, hey, if Illinois messed up so bad, how come the other high majors like a Kansas or Kentucky or even others in the fold didn't bring him in and guarantee him what Illinois wouldn't? I think that is a situation where Santa Clara was the type of spot where they lose Jalen Williams. They needed somebody to come in and shoot a lot, and he took it and ran with it. So, I think it stinks for Illinois. I understand why they did what they did. Yes, maybe you don't. I don't know. Yeah, the Sky Clark thing, maybe if you don't bring in Sky and you kept Brandon and you said, hey, we're going to give you some minutes on the ball and we'll find a way to get you in there.
If anybody has a tweet or a text that said, this is a mistake, don't take Sky Clark, keep Brandon Podziemski, give Pods the ball. I will, I don't know. I will shout you out on this podcast next. I'll reach you, whatever. Like, if you actually have that timestamp somewhere,
strong take.
Yeah, that'd be a hell of a take.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm just hoping this one will die. This one can maybe now go away. But he's probably going to, like you said, the situation in Golden State, probably going to put him in a situation to put up some good numbers and look good, and then we'll only hear more gripes. But
I'm happy for Brandon. I'm happy for Daddy Pods, man. Happy for those guys. Daddy Pods always
on the jump. He didn't ask how high. He just jumped.
Yep. Yeah. Daddy Pods knew all along, man. Hey, good for him.
Daddy Pods got some good pub.
He did.
Yep.
All right, Derek. Speaking of the draft, while we're here, I found it interesting. Only one college player taken in the top 5. I wish some of these G League guys were playing college basketball, but hey, it's working for them. Overtime elite as well. Did you have Jet Howard as the highest selected Big Ten player?
I did not. I don't think I know that mock drafts, he was kind of in around 20 or so. And I listening to a lot of the reaction, that was a pretty highly scrutinized pick by the Magic. Like they could have taken Grady Dick.
Do you feel better about the Vooch trade now that Jet Howard was the other first round?
A little bit better. I like Franz. That pick has turned out pretty well for the Magic, I think.
And I like Vooch. I like Vooch a lot as a player. I just wish we would have had one of those first rounders still.
I know. Vooch leaves a little bit probably in terms of expectation versus what we've gotten, a little bit left to be desired.
It was a bad trade.
But yeah, I think that if it would have been Grady Dick, I would have liked to have Franz Wagner and Grady Dick in hindsight. But Jet Howard, they want a shooter there in Orlando. They've taken a lot of guys that are not the most knocked down in terms of the outside. But I like the Kobe Buffkin pick. I would not have been surprised if it would have been Buffkin or obviously Jalen Hood-Schifino as the first to come off the board for the Big Ten. But Buffkin going to Atlanta, I think that's a good pick for them. He was one of the best players in the Big Ten down the stretch. Same with Hood-Schifino down the stretch of last year. But I like both those guys. And Jet Howard's a little bit more of a scrutinized type of selection.
I hate to go second rounders here, but I love the Big Ten second rounders. Jalen Pickett to the Nuggets. Is there a more perfect fit than high IQ, great passer, kind of unconventional player? Like you put him around, I obviously Jokic, but just the shooters in Denver. I think that's a great fit. Mm-hmm. Seth Lundy around Trae Young should get a lot of open looks. And Trace Jackson Davis, the Warriors at 57. Listen, I didn't think Trace was a first rounder. I just didn't see enough offense for that. But you talk about that Kevon Looney role. Yes. I think Trace Jackson Davis could be a real value pick. And I did like Chris Murray getting the Blazers, getting him at 23 to pair with Scoot Henderson. I think that could be a fun young core, especially if they decide trading Damian Lillard. So just a few Big Ten thoughts. Hood-Schifino of the Lakers is interesting. Long term, I don't know how much he helps them right away.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I like Hood-Schifino a lot, the player. I know he does need to get more consistent with his outside shot, but someone that in the pick and roll, definitely mid range. I mean, he had some huge games down the stretch, and I really like his game. Great point on a lot of those landing spots there in the second round. Pickett. We'll see booty ball on. Brad keeps talking about, hey, in the NBA, you're not allowed to do this.
Yeah. Every scouting report that I read had mentioned booty ball. So kudos to Brad Underwood for coining that. And hey, if Ty Rodgers is the point guard, indeed, there's gonna be a lot of booty ball for Illinois. So he might not like it, but he seems like he's gonna copy it with his point guard this year.
I think he's gonna learn to like it for sure, especially if it works. Yeah. But Pickett. With his passing, he really developed as a shooter last year too. That's a great landing spot. Trace, I'm in full agreement. I was surprised he fell as far. I know that talking to some other people, I was out, this weekend. You hear some talk from college coaches about the draft, and like he can't shoot. And look at the can't shoot big men like a Sanogo and Shibwe, and obviously Kofi a year or two ago. But he's a very good defender. I think as a passer, he can do well. I mean, when he got doubled last year, I thought he made a lot of really good decisions. Not that he's going to get doubled with the Warriors, but the way they move and have shooters off the ball, I think if you threw it into him and had Steph running off a screen or Clay, I think that could be something that really is something that works. And I mean, he's long, he's athletic. We'll see if he can ever get like a 15-foot jump shot. I mean, it was never really something that he even attempted this past year because it wasn't there for him. And Lundy probably wasn't talked enough about as an NBA prospect when he was playing with Penn State. I mean, his numbers last year his efficiency was as high as anybody in the country, really, and 40+% from three. He's definitely the NBA 3-and-D type of guy.
Yeah, I forgot to mention Sensabaugh, Bryce Sensabaugh going to Utah at pick 28.
What was the comp that Cats made for him?
Oh God. That's a heck of a list of comps there, Cats.
Mikal Bridges? Is that who it was? Or no, I couldn't remember who it was.
That wouldn't have shocked me. That wouldn't have shocked me if he made that comparison. Would Coleman Hawkins or Terrence Shannon been drafted, Derek? Because Ricky Council didn't get drafted. He and Shannon were, I think, for Gavoni, like right next to each other in his rankings, similar prospects. So I don't know. I think both those guys made good decisions. Now looking back, listen, Terrence Shannon's gonna be an old prospect that could really hurt him next year, but he's gonna make more guaranteed money probably come back to college than I think he would have in maybe not being selected or being selected in the last 10 or 15 picks.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about the comp between Shannon and Council. I know that Orlando liked him, not that they would have necessarily taken him because they didn't give him that guarantee.
And they traded that pick, by the way, at 36.
Oh boy. Yep, that could have been one of those wait around at the draft party type of situations. I think Shannon would have gotten picked, but I don't know exactly. It probably would have been middle of the second round, and maybe even dip into later if he finds situations that just teams that don't necessarily love him or want somebody else. Coleman's an interesting one. Like they're different players. Like you saw the way that Trace fell, and Coleman brings a different skill set. But I think that the knock of the 28% from three type of situation would have been probably hard for him to overcome, and he didn't have a ton of guarantees either, or any guarantees in terms of teams that would have taken him, what the contract would have looked like. I think Coleman would have really risked not being drafted personally. I know that he's come out and said, hey, anybody that thinks I wouldn't have been picked is crazy. But and I know that Illinois, even as the staff and people around them, thought that Coleman would have been a draft pick. But the way things played out, I think that there would have been a decent amount of risk for Coleman as that goes. I do think that Terrence probably would have been drafted, but you really never know.
All right, Derek, let's move on to recruiting. And you've seen these guys in person now after the weekend. Two guys that have really intrigued us over the last month of this June evaluation period. Phoenix Gill, let's start there. Obviously, the son of Illini legend Kendall Gill. Illinois offered him last summer after a strong summer. I find it interesting how Phoenix does not play AAU ball. But boy, he seems to have really impressed during the high school showcases here. So you saw him this past weekend. What do you think of Phoenix Gill?
He's having a great month, and it is really interesting because it's a pretty rare decision not to play AAU. But I think the way that he's showing this month, the competition's different. Like if he was on the EYBL circuit, he could be going up against, you put five guys on the floor that are usually D1 prospects in those type of games. So not to take anything away from him, but the fact that I think he's still finding ways to progress. His body's progressing. Him and Kendall are in the weight room a lot. And just the approach of trying to keep him fresh. I mean, I understand. I get it. Like as somebody that goes out and covers a lot of these events and knows how much the coaches are on the road. It's a grind. I mean, you finish the high school season and you get about 2-3 weeks until you're in the gym every weekend of AAU throughout the rest of the spring. Then you're with your high school team. Then back in July, you're playing AAU ball. And Kendall's talked about it. I know they did a feature on WGN that he thinks it's too much. It's too much in terms of burning kids out and not developing, really honing in on development. So in terms of what I saw from him, I know that I saw him score 35 points in the game at Riverside Brookfield. He shot the three really well. He got to the rim. He got fouled a bunch. He's a guy that pretty good athlete that when he decides to get downhill, it's hard to stay in front of him. So he was able to rack up a lot of fouls. Then you go to Romeoville this past weekend. I just love his feel. I love his feel for the game. His passing was really good when he's getting blitzed because, I mean, he's no doubt by far and away the best player on his team. He's got another guy that's a pretty good shooter that is something that defenses have to look out for. But he was getting doubled a lot off of ball screens, and the pop on the decision making was just spot on. Like he was finding the right guy in rhythm. Ball wasn't sticking. It just showed that he knows the game, and coaches love that. I know that you hear the buzz around. You're like, hey, that's a next level type of play that he's able to make. I think that the body's coming along. He's not a blow you away type of like head above the rim athlete, but he's a good athlete and is continuing to progress. I think similar to Kendall, maybe he's got a couple inches left to grow potentially because he was a late developer physically as well. So I like him. I understand if Illinois wanted to push. I understand people out there that say, hey, this is a chance to put a Gill number 13 in orange and blue again. Don't let other high majors come around and prevent that from happening. There are some that definitely have interest and will probably start offering if Illinois doesn't close this thing down. But I think they potentially could sometime this summer, and I would get it. I understand.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. I'm looking at the 24/7 Sports top 75 or whatever that we have in the class of 2025. There are no guys committed there, so this would be very early in the process for both the school and the player. Like I remember Tracy Abrams' day, right? Nana Egwu's day. Like all these guys are committing as sophomores. Jeremy Richmond is a freshman. That's rare nowadays with all the movement that's happening, both in transfer portal and you get the option to go pro, overtime elite or with the G League and all of that. So, but Phoenix Gill, Illinois, I wonder how many schools would like to offer Phoenix Gill, but they're like, hey, is this worth our time or effort right now? But certainly Illinois seems like that's a high major prospect now, and they made a good early evaluation. Illinois did make another in-state offer in 2024. Derek, Jason Jaxtis out of Yorkville. What do you make of him as a prospect after seeing him up close?
I saw him play really well this past weekend. They had a game against Whitney Young that Antonio Munoz is a nice prospect that he was really one-on-one against. He's probably a mid-major level athletic big man. I mean, he's probably 6'7", so I wouldn't say maybe big man, but front court player that he was matched up against. And then Young has a number of up-and-coming, freshmen and sophomores that are thought to be some of the better players in the state too. But Jaxis led his team to a victory and looked really, really good. I mean, I like his skill, the fact that he can stretch out to beyond the arc and shoots it with good fluidity. And I wasn't fluid in saying that, but it is definitely a fluid stroke and one that he makes pretty well. Can also do some stuff off the dribble. I know the knock. I think some people have seen him. He's a slender big man, blocks some shots, can face up and do all that kind of things. And some guys say Brandon Lieb. And after watching him enough, I think he's in a different category. I think he's more skilled than Brandon. I think he's more of a mobile and just more of a fluid athlete than Brandon Lieb was. So I like him. I think that there is some development that needs to happen, and he's not someone that's going to come in and impact you right away. I wouldn't imagine. I think you got to see if he's bought into kind of a longer term view of finding his way onto the court and being a significant piece for you. If he is, I mean, he grew up an Illinois fan. He told me that his dad's from Champaign. I think there's an attraction to want to come to Illinois and kind of follow into those footsteps. And as you look at it from Illinois' front court picture going forward, you got Merez already committed. You've got Monty Hansberry here as a freshman. You're going to have Dane for another year. You've got some physicality, some guys down there that can really impact around the rim, rebound, all that type of stuff. If you can have a stretch type of big man that does a little bit of what Coleman does now, I think that would make sense. Even though maybe you go to the portal to get that in an immediate and then have a guy like Jaxis develop and be that guy sophomore year, junior year, whatever it might be. But I after seeing him more, I understand the offer, and I do like his potential. He's a good player.
Yeah, and Derek, when you got 13 scholarships, listen, I know they'd like more, but there's a couple spots for developmental guys, right? And if it's Jaxtis or if it's Phoenix Gill that might need a year or two, like there are opportunities there where you can have a couple guys who aren't top 70 recruits, right? Like, and maybe these guys can end up there, especially maybe Gill if he really takes off here. But there's spots for that, especially for in-state guys who I think understand the process, understand what their role eventually is going to be. And then, as you said, you supplement it with, Illinois is going to need somebody after Coleman Hawkins in that role, add a transfer, and then you add Jaxis behind it. Makes some sense. So I still think there's a place for developmental guys. We're seeing it with Nicolo Moretti. I don't think Amani Hansberry needs to be a developmental guy, but with what Illinois has in the front court, he might get a year of development before he's counted on in a huge role.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that as you go forward, is probably different than this year, where you look on the roster and you probably got 10 guys that are probably ready to play this year or definitely want to be in that mix, where going forward, and that still leaves 3 scholarship spots for someone like Moretti. I think Hansberry is going to be in a situation where he's not going to play a ton this year if everything goes well with Guerrier, Damask, obviously Coleman, Dane. But you can have a handful of guys, 2, 3, where they are longer term prospects. And I think that we were talking before we got on the pod of like maybe when they're in-state guys, they're a little bit more. And now I know we've had the Adam Millers leave, and there's been a handful of guys that you might think would stick it out that didn't, but someone that might be from the state might be more willing to understand the situation, be more bought in, be more happy to be at Illinois when maybe they don't play for a year. I look at Purdue with Trey Kaufman-Renn, came in, Indiana kid came in, redshirted. We never see that. Who redshirts these days? Matt Painter,
the last one. I guess Moretti technically did, but that really doesn't count. He showed up in February.
Yeah. If they're not like transfer, well, now you don't have to when you transfer. There's really very few occasions when we see red shirts anymore. But I think that Brad likes that potential, and especially starting with 25 and beyond in that class. And I know the Jackson's a 24, but you're going to have maybe more of an emphasis back onto high school recruiting because of get rid of the COVID year, and it kind of shrinks the portal some. I still think it's going to be crazy and still going to be very active. But I think that it's an interesting try to find your lane, because I think that Brad's gone heavy on the portal recently, but also still misses some of the developmental program, long-term chemistry, culture, buy-in, and all that stuff. So it's trying to find the right lane. And it is got to be adaptable, which I will say that they definitely are. But there's value to that too.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like, as we get more data on this, like, you can succeed either way, whether you're Purdue or Michigan State and don't really go after transfers, or whether you're UConn and you supplement with transfers with good recruiting classes, or if you go just all out transfers like Miami. Like, you can have success. Arkansas in many, many different ways here. Last thing I want to get to, Derek, is Josh Whitman in his 70-minute introductory statement, which I appreciate. He was asking us if it was too long. He's like, no, it's really informative. But I found it interesting that he went out of his way to discuss basketball and his lack of NCAA tournament success, because Whitman is plugged in. He does not follow many people on Twitter, but I think he knows what is being said on Twitter. And I think he shares the frustration of Illini fans. He's talked about that, of not having an extended run in the NCAA tournament. But he also said, listen, the NCAA tournament can be a little bit of luck. It can be a little bit of toss-ups. It can be it's not the ultimate measure of where your program sits, though ultimately our goal is to win in the NCAA tournament. And I thought he said it well. The last 2 years, listen, you ran some good teams. You kind of toss-up games there. But he even mentioned, like, hey, 2021, that was the one. Like, that was the one we screwed up. And as we've talked about, that is the cloud hanging over this program that has led to a lot of angst in the fan base. I'm just wondering, what did you make of Josh Whitman? And I think it landed with some fans. I don't know if it landed with others who just want an NCAA tournament run before they're happy about anything, which I get. The NCAA tournament is what we live for here.
I get where he's going with it. And I look, the ultimate kind of evaluation of where was the program pre-Brad Underwood to where it is now is you've made a lot of strides. You're a consistent factor in the Big Ten. You've got a chance. If you look at CBS, you look at, I think the Athletics, Seth Davis did his preseason top 25. You're kind of on the back end of that top 25. And I mentioned it before in the podcast. If you are an AP preseason top 25 team, that's the first time, as far as I can remember, that you would be in that situation to be preseason top 25 4 years in a row, and like at least a 60-year sample size. So to do that year after year after year, you're a factor every season. And you also obviously have gone to the tournament 3 straight years, can make it 4, would be expected to make it 4. That I think a lot of people would have killed for the Purdue, the Wisconsin, the obviously Michigan State type of consistency where you can go into every season and expect to be a player. And I think that now Illinois is definitely that. Now, there is a difference when you look at, Bo Ryan went to a handful of Sweet 16s, ended up going to 2 Final Fours. You look at, Michigan, Beeline had some Final Fours in there. Izzo, obviously, a lot of those. Purdue has not had.
The interesting part I always bring up about Izzo is his most talented teams usually are not the ones that make the runs. It's usually the old team with that hits the hot streak at the right time.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, the most talented one in recent memory, I can remember Miles Bridges, Jaron Jackson, Cassius Winston. That team was young, really talented, but got bounced early first weekend type. He did when he had the stars aligned with Mateen Cleaves and everything. I mean, that team definitely got it done, and that's where it stings for Illinois because it seemed like your stars were aligned with Ayo Dosunmu, Kofi Cockburn in 2021, and you just didn't get there. So people should want NCAA tournament success.
Yes.
I'm
I'm not saying, I'm not saying they
Yeah.
should apologize about that, right? Like,
right, and
expectations should be high.
yes, and Whitman didn't dodge that. He didn't try to act like they didn't want it. I'm more though. I'm on the side where I think it is a huge part of your evaluation. I understand that there is definitely nuance to this. That yes, a regular season and that type of thing does provide maybe more of a snapshot of just your foundation and where you are and where you're getting just the entry point of the tournament every year if you are in that situation, which is great. But you do have to show up when it counts. Like there's a reason why you look at the NFL postseason. Aaron Rodgers, a lot of criticism because his Packers teams didn't get far enough, or some of those type of things. There's other postseasons where it's all on that single elimination tournament. So I push back some on the randomness or don't evaluate this as much. But
well, if the sample size gets bigger too, it becomes more of a problem for Brad. Right? Because listen, I think Arkansas was the better, more talented team than Illinois at the end, especially with some of the injury issues they had. Houston was a better team. Illinois had some injury issues. I'm not trying to make excuses here, which some people are going to take it as, but those teams are really, really good. You shouldn't have lost to Loyola, and Illinois was completely unprepared for that moment. Maybe it's because COVID happened. They didn't have the NCAA tournament experience the year before, but there were no adjustments in that game. Illinois has not been prepared in the NCAA tournament to win games. They've played 4 poor games out of the 5 under Brad Underwood, right? Like,
even the Chattanooga game, probably should have lost.
Should have lost that game. And the one game you won, which was it Drexel? Now that I remember, like it's Drexel. You have Kofi Cockburn. Like it didn't matter. So, but you earned that with a 1 seed, right? That's what you earned with a 1 seed. So that sample size gets larger. The microscope obviously gets bigger on Brad Underwood. So I'm not saying that should go away. But I do understand his point, which is Illinois in the mix. You keep getting bites at the apple, and at some point you need to make a run. But I don't think this team is going to be bad. There seems to be a segment that thinks this team misses the NCAA tournament. Maybe we'll cut this up in 9 months, Derek, and somebody can go, oh, we're going to guarantee they're going to be in the NCAA tournament. I have a pretty good feeling this team's going to be in the NCAA tournament. I just have no idea how they're going to play once they get there.
I'm 100% with you. Some are really on edge about like if Brad doesn't go to the Sweet 16 this year, I mean, he should be on the hot seat type of thing. I mean, I think that the hot seat type of conversation with Brad, I think is absolutely crazy.
I don't think it's a good faith argument. Like if you want to bring up criticism, you want to say, hey, is he the guy? Like if you want to bring up, hey, they make the tournament, lose the first round, he got us A to B. Is he the guy that gets this to point C? I'm all for, like, that'd be fine. I think that is fair. But the discussion of like he's on the hot seat now, like that's not reality. That's not a good faith argument.
No, it's not reality. Like you said, I do think kind of it does circle back to some of the point guard talk of, hey, you got everything else this year. If you could add that point guard, I understand why you'd want to do that, to get this monkey off your back, to calm the fan base. That's why it's a tough decision, but maybe it works with Ty Rodgers. I think Ty Rodgers can be enough to be able to, when you go into the tournament, and he's sometimes unique matchups are the things that bother people the most. And that could be something that is tough for people to deal with.
We buried this, Derek. I'm sorry to do this. I didn't mention it when we first brought it up. This team should be awesome defensively. They should be awesome. They should be. Like, I'd be disappointed if they're not. Mm-hmm. You have Ty Rodgers, Sincere Harris, Terrence Shannon, who I think can, like Ayo during his college career, I think can go to another level defensively, and if he's locked in a little bit more. Coleman Hawkins is an all Big Ten caliber defender. this team should be really good defensively. I think Gary Ayer can be a solid piece. I think Luke Goody's a good team defender. You know what I mean? Like
Harmon should be a good defender.
Yeah, like this team should be one of the top teams defensively. I think that's going to make them consistent. But it's whether they can shoot the ball, whether in the NCAA tournament consistently from three, of how far they go. Like that for me is going to be the most interesting thing. But with that group, they should be very good defensively, and they were not good defensively at the end of last year.
Right. No, I fully agree. I mean, I really like the way that Gary A can guard fours. I mean, take him off the wing where he was guarding a lot at Oregon, and he's a physical guy that I think pairs really well with Coleman. And yeah, they should be able to really guard. And I even think Dre Gibbs Lawhorn has everything athletically to be a good defender too. And if he's as much of a dog as I've heard, I mean, we saw Sincere Harris, dudes that are hungry and gritty and want to get after you. I think he's got a chance to do that too. So you go down the list of the roster, it's got a chance to definitely be very good at that end. If you can shoot it better, if Coleman can make the strides as a shooter, if Domas coming in as a guy that's not a primary option, now he's more of a spot up, and maybe he's a very good catch and shoot. Gary A. If you get the shooting upgrade, at least even marginally to decent point guard play, good defense, there's enough baked in there to make a run. But yeah, I mean, kind of big picture, as long as Brad is continually in that like top 5 of the Big Ten type of mix, good season in the tournament, there's no immediate like eject button that's going to get pressed here. It is going to be interesting to just kind of see after this season, if you don't go on the run this year, say you're a first weekend exit, and if it is even worst case scenario, maybe like I'm not going to say worst case because I think you get to the tournament, maybe lose first round, then there's significant roster turnover. I think that picture after this year, what's left of it, how you navigate that could be a challenge the following year. And that's where things could maybe go, I'm not going to say go sideways, but it could get interesting in terms of the conversation around Brad. If this year doesn't work, and then there's so much to replace next year.
Which is why I kind of side with the Rodgers, just to make this full circle. Harris, Dre Gibbs Allhorn, if Monty Hansberry needs to play a little bit, like that's your core for the future, along with Dane Danger, right? So like I think it's probably best long term to just roll with those guys unless some great point guard comes around here. All right, Derek, I think we covered it all, man. The offseason continues though.
So we got it all figured out. It's late June and we figured it all out. So we'll talk to you in October.
Great stuff, Derek. Appreciate the time as always, man.
Yeah, always fun.